OverDrive on a Monday. Jim, Tatti, and Dave Feschuk with you, starting the week off in fine fashion.
Let's hope it goes better for us than it did for the women's national soccer team.
What a start to a week.
Woof.
Got up in the wee hours, watched it, and boy, that was a disintegrating performance, to say the very least.
Like right out of the gate.
Yeah, it just didn't happen.
Barely had the coffee going, and it was like not looking good for Canada.
No, did not work out. And I was left, after that, of course, you feel empty, and you tune in and kept going on TSN to support our colleagues on the other side. And so, watching the Holinka Gretzky tournament and 3-1 Canada early in the game, they lost 9-6 to Finland.
Tough day for the national sides.
Yeah, the national side struggled today. I'll map out the guests here first. We're going to have Josh Lewenberg at the bottom of the hour. The Raptors have added another veteran, and we'll get into that. Steve Phillips at 5:05 on the Maple Toyota hotline, talking about the Jays, who did a nice job on the weekend by adding a lefty-righty, both from St. Louis. But really nice recovery there, and we'll see what happens at the deadline, which is at 6 tomorrow.
Gotta love the Jordan Hicks move. I think it's great. Yeah. And I think, Jim, it's significant for a couple of reasons. Because how long have guys like us been harping on shows like this about the fact that every other team in baseball come this time of year for the past handful of years has been prioritizing one thing, and that's electric arms out of the bullpen, right? Yeah. Guys that can throw 100 out of the bullpen. And it seemed like the Blue Jays, they had some of those guys. They didn't have as many as
can you have too many?
Yeah, it does. It felt like they didn't have as many as maybe they needed. And here we go. They go out at the deadline, and they break character on a couple of fronts. They break character because they finally get one of those guys in Jordan Hicks who can throw 100 plus, maybe second hardest thrower in major leagues, depending on which metric you look at. And they also break character by giving up control, giving up futures in a couple of AA pitchers, and taking on Hicks, who, of course, has no contract remaining. There's no club control there. It is for all those years that Roz Atkins would brag about all the club control they'd acquired in trade deadline moves. This time they're signaling that maybe this isn't about club control. This is about winning now.
I mean, you can only play that game for so long, and I think they have the right read on it. So now I'm not going to say they're all in, but close to it.
Yeah,
we'll see if they get a right-handed bat. They're in conversation about that, according to our reporters, and what else do they want to have? Maybe a starter, but unfortunately, the Ryu start is after the deadline. It's tomorrow night.
Yeah,
you got a bit of a sample size on Manoah. There's some promise there, but I don't really think anybody's thinking he's returned to form. But there is something to work with, right?
Well, they hope.
Yeah,
they certainly hope so. I mean, it didn't. The fact that he left. He left the game. What was it, Saturday? After
nasty.
That pretty nasty pitch. That hits Taylor Ward in the face, right? I mean, that's a tough moment for Alek Manoah. Obviously, a terrible moment for the Angels and for Ward. But yeah, he's no sure thing. Ryu is no sure thing. We're going to have Steve Phillips on the show today at a little after 5, and Steve's been advocating for a bigger move from the Blue Jays, like a Verlander type of move.
Yeah, so he wanted
a big name.
He wanted the relief that they've got.
Yeah,
he wanted a right-handed bat and another starter.
Right.
So they're 50% done.
Right.
According to his list. Yeah,
they're 50% done. And I look, 6-man rotation. They've got. You wonder how much internally they're going to overvalue their own guys, or maybe properly value their own guys and say we can get it done with Ryu and Manoah and some combination thereof. But certainly, if they were truly all in, you would think they'd be looking at another starting arm plus that right-handed bat that so far has eluded them.
Yeah, let's be honest here. The schedule sort of dictates that they do something. They're at home for 4 against Baltimore, and then on to Boston for 3. The Red Sox are sniffing around. The Yankees are sniffing around. They sort of dealt with the Angels on the weekend.
Yeah,
and then you have to, as you're dealing with the standings, then you have to consider what those other teams are going to do at the deadline as well, because they're all going to bulk up.
I don't know how much teams do that though. Like, can you really be worried about what the other teams are doing? I mean,
well, you have to be aware of it.
Yeah, I guess you're aware of it, but I do think this is one thing where, we've talked to many executives after many trade deadlines over the years in this town. And one thing I kind of believe them on is, although it does sound like the company line, it does sound like they're kind of feeding you a line of BS, is that they don't pay attention to what the other teams are doing, because, and I sort of believe it to a degree. Yeah, look, I mean, if you're chief rival, if it was a two-team race and your chief rival in that two-team race goes out and makes a big splash, maybe that's going to catch your attention, obviously. But I also think that it's tough enough to make these deals, right? And then it's tough enough to worry about your own stuff than to worry about somebody else's at a moment like this, right? You gotta dot the I's and cross the T's of some, the details that get a trade done. Can you really be worried about what the Orioles are doing, what the Yankees may or may not be doing? I don't know how much you can worry about that, because these deals don't happen overnight, right? They're worked on for days and days.
I'm not saying
weeks at a time, sometimes months at a time.
I'm not saying that somebody says, "Well, look what the Red Sox did. We have to match that." I think you have to maximize what you have and plug your perceived holes in your lineup. But at the same time, you have to be aware of what they're doing. Not that you can counter it, but you don't want to get stuck without the chair when the music stops.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And look, I mean, this is a funny trade deadline, because a lot of what we thought would be available, first and foremost, Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah.
Then the guys from the Cubs, like the Bellingers of the world, who they've been pulled from the market apparently, unless there's an 11th hour change of heart in either Anaheim or Chicago. So who knows what there actually is out there? It doesn't seem like there's nearly as much as some GMs would like. It seems like it is a seller's market, which is good for the teams that are selling, and tougher for the teams like the Blue Jays that want to buy because they believe that this could be the year.
Well, we'll see, as we like to say. I want to go back to the weekend. And by the way, we've got the starting lineup for tonight, and Springer's not in it. So if we go back to that shift that happened Friday afternoon in preparation for the Angels series, Merrifield in the leadoff, and I did his games 3 for 4, 2 for 5, 1 for 5, drove in an RBI in each game, belted a home run, 5 for 14. Springer was 0 for 4, 0 for 4, 1 for 4, 1 for 12, and is not playing tonight, or not starting.
Yeah, I added up. The number I had was he's 1 for his last 39.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, there's something preceded the batting lineup change on Friday, but this is the result of the change.
Yeah, it's ugly.
Yeah.
It's ugly for George Springer right now, and they got to hope that it turns around. And I guess you can say that for a handful of their guys, right? And I guess if you want to spin the optimistic sort of storyline here, is that if they can sort of go through this, tough spot for George Springer, a tough spot for Alek Manoah, it might be more than a tough spot for Alek Manoah. It's been a tough entire year. Vladdy hasn't been, as great as maybe they'd hoped at times. Bo Bichette's been up and down. He's certainly, had some post All-Star break swoons, whatever you want to call them. If these guys can ever find it at the same time, they've never really caught fire at the same time, or even sort of been sort of warming their hands by the fire at the same time. There's always been a guy or two guys or three guys that have been cold. We know about their woes, driving in runs with runners in scoring position. So the optimistic storyline is, hey, if they can bolster the bullpen, which they've already started doing, if they can get another starter, and then they bring in one more bat that changes the look to some degree, and then maybe, through whatever, regression or progression to the mean that the Blue Jays, that a baseball season takes, right, with all the ups and downs of stats and probabilities, maybe there's something better ahead. But right now, for George Springer, it looks like pretty grim.
Yeah, I would agree with what you're saying there. I mean, if you look at where they are, they're obviously in. There are teams chasing them, but they're in spite of
a
lot of things that didn't mesh together. And now, half full, half empty. If they continues not meshing together, maybe that's a problem. But if it does mesh together, then the best days are ahead. So that's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
And this week is, you got 7 games in your own division, which has been a slight bruise on their record in the past. And if they could rectify that or do something about it, then that would be a step in the right direction as well. So we're going over that starting lineup for tonight, and Springer is out, and he got shifted to the 5-hole on the weekend, and that didn't work. John Schneider, the manager, on his lineup changes on the weekend. It's there somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, just trying to, spread it out a little bit, trying to, have Vlad get a little bit more protection, nothing against anybody else, but I think you get a dude like George Springer behind Vlad, and it's a dangerous thing. Wick continued to do what he had been doing, and, I think for now, we'll run with it. And, we want, the goal of it is to get, Vlad, George up with guys on base, Witt up with guys on base, and the bottom of the order is producing. So, I think we'll roll with it for a little bit. And, hopefully it leads to more runs, more wins.
Yeah, and not rolling with it tonight, so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's scared of George Springer being behind Vlad right now when he's won for his past 39. But and so tonight it's not George Springer behind Vlad. It's Matt Chapman.
Yep.
So it's Merrifield leading off, Bichette, Belt, Guerrero, Chapman. But I do think he hits on a great point there, and Rich Griffin brought it up, I guess, last time he was on with us, talking about how if a lot of this we've made a lot about Vladdy not being the MVP caliber hitter that people had hoped to expect from this year, right? After 2 years removed for hitting the 48 home runs, last year has a bit of a setback season, and you thought, well, this will be the bounce back, right? He'll come back strong, and he'll be back to being that guy that was 1-2 with Shohei Ohtani as American League MVP. It hasn't happened, and Griff pointed out, I think, it's not a conversation that I'd heard a lot around town, that how much do you bet, how much do you sort of pass that blame on to the guys around Vlad, right? Like, if you don't ever have to, if you're an opposing team building a scouting report, building a pitching plan and an approach to how to get these guys out, if you're not afraid of the guys around Vladdy, you're not going to give Vladdy anything to hit. Why would you?
That's like the reverse of how they approached Ohtani on Friday night.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that makes, on the flip side of that, the fact that Ohtani continues to do what he does with Mike Trout not batting behind him makes it even more impressive, because that is not exactly a murderer's row of an Angels lineup.
Yeah.
And he doesn't see a ton of great pitches, but the ones he does see, he generally obliterates in ways that make every other team cower in fear. But yeah, I do think Schneider's onto something there, and the idea that they've got to bolster the protection around Vladdy. That's not to excuse Vladdy, because he's had some bad moments this year with questionable approach at the plate at big moments, but yeah, to me, this is a concern.
Absolutely. So let's go back, circle back to the Women's World Cup, 4-0 to Australia. 4-0 in a soccer game. I mean, I know one of the goals was in extra penalty time or injury time, I guess is the way to put that. But still, I mean, that was a disintegrating performance. But as I watched the end of that game and realizing that Nigeria was on its way to a tie with Ireland, I thought, wow, what a missed opportunity in game one, where they had, there's the Sinclair penalty kick that didn't go, and there was a couple of other opportunities. And I think that after that game, a lot of Canadian soccer fans were looking at that, not understanding the damage that caused, because Nigeria just gets in by one more point than Canada. So if Canada wins that game, we got a different storyline here. But after that performance in that first game, you're looking at it and going, I was expecting something else, right?
Yeah.
And we didn't get it.
It's an interesting parallel between the way the Women's World Cup went and the way the men's went, right? With game one against Belgium, where Canada, by a lot of measures, outplayed Belgium, by a lot of measures was the better team, and of course does not emerge with the 3 points, and has its best player of a generation, in Alphonso Davies, miss a penalty, just like Sinclair missed the penalty against Nigeria in that game. And I do think it kind of
felt the same.
It kind of filtered into the remainder of the tournament, right? Like the missed opportunity in game one begets problems in game 2 and 3.
Well, I mean, when you've got 3 matches, you can't leave anything on the table.
Yeah.
And, Nigeria, you have to give them credit for beating Australia the way they did. Took it to them in the first half and weathered the storm, but that's a big win. Australia still wins the group, but,
Well, hey, man, like you talk about, pressure. Like Australia had a ton of pressure on them to be the home team, to have your coach saying before the match that if they don't get out of the group, it's a failure. This is not a program that, had a great record against Canada. Canada had beaten this Australian team last year in a couple of friendlies in Australia. Canada's record against them was really pretty solid. Canada's defending gold medalist at the Olympics only a couple summers ago, got the all-time leading scorer in men's or women's international soccer. And there was a lot of things stacked against Australia. And they came through big time. The thing that struck me, Jim, was just like having watched this team through those 2 bronze medal performances in 2012 London, 2016 Rio, and then watching them culminate with the gold medal in Tokyo 2021. all those teams, those three teams, had incredible like discipline, fight.
It was a build.
And yeah, but there was a great build. And
Yep.
they always they were defensively tough. They kind of had that Canadian underdog mentality to them. Like
Yes.
they maybe nobody expects anything out of us, but we're going to show you that we belong here. This team, this particular team, it just showed none of that to me. I didn't see any of that from this team. And that concerned me.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. And so really what you're saying is this is a step back, this performance. It takes
Feels
you back. Takes you back over 10 years, right?
Well, it felt like it. And I guess, look, maybe we'll find out more about, all the inner workings. We do know this. Like, Bev Priestman had talked about how this was, in many ways, one of the most difficult teams she ever had to pick. Like, to actually come to the final 23 athlete roster for this tournament was very difficult for her because I think she was caught in between, right?
Yep.
Do I go younger and maybe, send the older generation off? Maybe earlier than they like to be sent off? Or do I keep some of the older experience here? Obviously, Sinclair would be the flagship of that group and try and meld these two generations of talent. And it seems to me like with Sinclair being as ineffective as she was, obviously not starting in game 2, starting game 3 today, and then being substituted at half, it didn't seem to work, right? Maybe she picked wrong. That's a tough position for a coach to be in.
You only know the answer to that when it's over, and that's a difficult thing. If you apply that to any team, when you've got a transition in terms of leadership and star players, when do you make the transition?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, it's too early or too late. It's rarely done properly.
Yeah,
it's very difficult.
And let's not shy away from the other issue here, Jim. Like, ultimately, this may go down as a situation where the players were worn out, not by being in Australia, not by the grueling nature of being a soccer player, but by the dysfunction above them in Canada soccer, right? Like,
they got to fix that.
Yeah, they're quarreling. They spent so much of their energy quarreling over equal pay and quarreling over where the money goes in Canada soccer, which is still, to many eyes, a mystery. And quarreling over the fact they didn't get a proper send-off. They didn't get the preparatory matches that bigger nations, more established soccer nations with better financial situations for their national teams got. They could definitely tell you a story of woe. And I think it's a legitimate story of woe.
Sure it is.
But I will say this, like, you got to be careful as an athlete, though, when you make that the excuse, right?
Well, it can't be, it can be a factor, but it can't be an excuse.
That's the thing.
So, your choice as an athlete is, do I want to talk about the loss or do I want to celebrate the win?
Right.
That's it.
That's exactly it.
I hate to be hardcore about that, but that's it.
It is.
You're either going to come up with a lot of reasons why it didn't work. The reason why it didn't work was they were defeated.
Yeah.
That's why it didn't work.
Well, it just didn't work on the field. Like, it didn't work on the pitch. It didn't work. This group did not work well together by any estimation. And they didn't, like, to me, there was no bounce back. There was no toughness. There was no, maybe there was moments of it when they came from behind against Ireland, right? But I didn't see it today.
Oh, after the first goal, yeah.
Yeah.
But no, there was none of that today. It got worse as it went on.
Yeah.
Everything they tried, it
felt like they gave up a little bit. It felt like they gave up on some balls, and it felt like they gave up in general.
You couldn't say that they had missed opportunities.
No.
Because they didn't have many.
No, there was just no push the other way. And that's disappointing. And maybe they were just worn out by all the nonsense they had to go through because of the dysfunction at Canada soccer.
It's a factor.
Yeah.
You can't say it's not.
But I'll tell you what, we heard Christine Sinclair after the match today talk about how something's got to change. Agree with her on that. She talked about how there's not a pro league in Canada, which of all the great soccer nations in the world, Canada's the one without the pro league and the pathway for elite young players to move up to the national team level.
Instead of sending them all over the place.
Yeah, and look, Diana Matheson's trying to start a league. National team alumnus is trying to start a league, and they've got 4 of the 8 teams spoken for, and they're hoping to start by 2025. But that's still a long way off. But I'll say this: like, they didn't help themselves. That cause did not get helped by this team doing what it did. Like, I spoke to Diana Matheson before the tournament. The momentum for that pro league really could have used a deep Canada run here to showcase women's soccer in this country, to convince people that it's could be a ratings winner on TV. And
I sort of agree with that. I think that because of what's happened at the administration level, this has to be reviewed, and somebody's got to come up with an explanation or two, and things have to be changed. I know that they've changed the structure, and different people are in control now, but I think there needs to be an accounting for what happened there.
Yeah, I think the history of international soccer, Jim, is nobody accounts for anything. But maybe I'm wrong on that. I'm not an accountant.
Well, Christine Sinclair, so is this the end? And as Canada was eliminated today, we do have some sound from her, and this is obviously post-match. So let's listen to what she had to say.
I saw you hug every member of your team tonight on the field there before you left the field. What was your message to them?
I just love them all. You can make me cry. We go through everything together, winning and losing. It's all part of the game. It's why we love this sport. And we've always said we're a family, and we do it together. Whether we win an Olympic gold medal or lose in the group stage of a World Cup, we do it together.
So that is Christine Sinclair in conversation with TSN's Claire Hanna at the end of in the elimination. And you can see there's some emotion there, and it likely is the end.
Well, she didn't say she was retiring.
No, but...
And I mean, I'm not... If I'm betting on Christine Sinclair, I bet she tries to make a run for Paris. It's only a year away, right? Like, Paris Olympics started, I think, a year yesterday or a year today. She hasn't said a word about retirement. And she said this is probably her last World Cup.
World Cup, yeah.
That's 4 years away.
That's right, yeah.
So if she's saying she's probably not playing 4 years from now, I would bet a considerable sum that she will be trying to play a year from now in Paris at the Olympics.
She took some blades of grass off the pitch.
Yeah, that was the World Cup grass, though. It wasn't the Olympic grass.
That's right. Well, and they're defending champs, so...
That's what I mean.
Yeah, there's always a silver lining or a gold lining.
Well, I mean, she can make the case, look, it didn't go that well for her at times, but she had a golden scoring chance in the first game, not only on the penalty, but she had that one... from the goal mouth there where she just missed it. I mean, now you could say on one hand, she's not sharp. She's not as sharp as she used to be. She could have been the first person of either gender to score in 6 World Cups, right? She had that chance. She missed it. On the other hand, she could say, hey, I was there. Like I'm the one that put myself in the position to get that chance, and I just didn't make it that time. Like I could have scored a goal. I could have been the star of this team, an inch here and there, difference of a smidgen of a fraction of a boot here and there, and maybe that ball goes in the net, and suddenly the story's different, right? Maybe that's how athletes think, in my experience. She probably figures, hey, if it goes a little bit different, well, I could have been the hero here.
And they have perfect context because they're playing, so they know the margin between it working out and not working out.
Or some of them are delusional and they misrepresent their skills.
I think they've got a pretty good idea why it didn't work out and how close they were to having it go the other way.
The one area where there's a blind spot often, Jim, is when it comes to, is it time to go, right? And we've seen a lot of people hang on a little too long, and somebody has to quietly say into their ear, or maybe loudly say into their ear, no, it's time to go. And I think that'll be a tough decision if Bev Priestman is the coach going forward. Who knows? I mean, World Cups like this, and some countries a World Cup like this would mean you ain't coming back as coach. I'm not sure. Canada's a much more benevolent place, but certainly in certain soccer countries, you would not get away with coaching a team to this result with, being the defending gold medal, being the first, by the way, defending gold medalist not to get out of the group stage in a World Cup. Like that's a stain on your coaching record.
Well, I mean, when we were doing the pre-tournament talk, we were wondering why the Team Canada was being disrespected, or was that a proper perception?
Yeah. And
apparently not. It wasn't disrespect at all.
Well, not with the way they performed.
No.
They felt it was. They were trying to make the case that nobody was rating them highly enough, that they were being overlooked, and the bookies had it wrong with the odds and all the rest of it. But it turned out, guess what? They couldn't deliver.
Yeah, later on in the broadcast, 6:25, Brendan Dunlop will stop by and we'll go over this again. Obviously, trade deadline day for Major League Baseball tomorrow at 6. So the Jays will get all their business done. There's the Leafs and the Raptors in their offseason. What will they do? The Raptors signed veteran Garrett Temple, 1-year deal. Their roster is full. And Josh Lewenberg will be by to join us. And I find the Raptors going down to like 2 roads, like sort of this way. And then, if there's a Siakam trade, then they're going to do a quick turn to the left. So
yeah,
I don't know how that's going to play out. But Josh will enlighten us. This is OverDrive on TSN 2, TSN 1050. Oh, yes, guy. Jim Tatti and Dave Feschuk subbing for the regulars today. I'm going to be back with Frankie C. tomorrow, Brendan Dunlop later in the week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and he'll be on with us at 6:25 talking about the Women's World Cup. Now, we've got the FIBA World Cup for men's basketball, and that's a couple of weeks away, and Canada will be involved in action in Indonesia. So yet another tournament about to start.
Yes, indeed. Let's hope this one goes better than all the previous Olympic qualifiers where Canada has not come through on the men's side.
Frustrating.
Has been.
Yeah, very frustrating.
Has been. Flashes of Thomas Satoransky in the Czech Republic getting the better of Canada in another one of those games that just make you shake your head and say, how the heck did we lose to the Czech freaking Republic?
How the heck did that happen?
Great question.
Going to talk basketball now with Josh Lewenberg, our Raptors reporter. So we'll get into the FIBA World Cup very shortly. But Garrett Temple signed on with the Raptors today. Josh, welcome. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well, Pat, man. How are you guys doing?
Everything's good so far, but there's plenty of time to mess this up. So
no pressure.
Yeah, no, I'm sure we'll get there. Garrett Temple, so the roster's full, and on the lower end of the roster, there is some seniority, isn't there?
There is, and probably more than you would expect on a team like this, and that's why this is a surprising signing. I mean, first of all, I like Garrett Temple, and maybe let's start there because I think the biggest thing that he brings is the off-court stuff. Just speaking with people around the league over the last few years, the thing that stands out about him is his veteran presence, what he brings in the room. He's as well regarded as any vet in the league. He's been around a long time. He's played with a lot of guys, 220 of them to be exact. It's the third most of any active player in the NBA. So he's had a lot of teammates, and they pretty much all speak highly of him. So having guys like that in the room, always a good thing, especially for a team where the Raptors are at. I mean, it seems like their plan is to continue to develop while also trying to be competitive. And you need vets in there to help bring guys like Scotty Barnes or Grady Dick along. But you mentioned the seniority at the back end of the roster, and that's what's surprising to me because Masai has always had this stated preference of using those back end of the roster, back end of the rotation spots on young players instead of veteran journeymen. And it makes sense, right? Like take a flyer on somebody with an unknown ceiling, unknown upside, rather than somebody who's on the wrong end of their prime. And in this case, you've got three veterans occupying those spots in Thad Young, Otto Porter Jr., and now Garrett Temple, which leads me to believe, I think more than anything else, is that this is not a finished product. This is not the finished roster. If it is, I've got some questions, and I think a lot of people do, but I would be very surprised if this is what the roster looks like, certainly in February at the trade deadline, but even on opening night in October, I think there's still some moves to be made. And having guys, I mean, listen, clearly if they're signing Temple, they like him. But Thad Young is a guy that they could have waived before his contract became fully guaranteed at the beginning of July. Once they lost Fred VanVleet, they allowed his contract to become fully guaranteed, not necessarily because they love him as a rotation piece. Certainly we saw him fall out of the rotation plans last year, but it's a potential trade chip, his contract, and I think they look at Otto Porter Jr. that way as well. So, yeah, I think at least a couple of those guys could be on the move if, in fact, there is a move to be made.
Well, Josh, we heard Fred VanVleet talk about the chemistry issues on this team last year, and it seemed like a bit of a divide between maybe the veteran group that had been there a while, Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakams of the world, maybe the Thad Youngs of the world, and then obviously Scotty Barnes and the rest of the guys who were on the younger side of the equation. Is this sort of a doubling down by Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster to say, guess what, we're still going to have some veterans in here, Scotty, and we'd like you to listen to them? Or does that have anything to do with this in terms of the way they're looking at building this thing?
Well, certainly you're right in the way that things played out last year. I think you could feel it. You could see it. I mean, it even played out publicly in one instance with Thad Young and Scotty Barnes kind of having some words in between halves. And it sounds like a lot of that sort of thing happened behind closed doors last year as well. But at the end of the day, I mean, like, you need to have those guys around, especially, I mean, we've heard the word culture used a ton. I mean, it's used a ton in professional sports in general. It's become one of those buzzwords. But especially from Masai Ujiri here, and especially over the last few months since the coaching change, it's a lot of it has been about reestablishing the culture. And I think if you're going to do that, you need to have guys like Garrett Temple around, maybe Thad Young, right? Like, it can't just be a room full of kids, because the kids need to learn. As much as, like, the on-court stuff, obviously we saw Scotty Barnes hit a bit of a wall in that regard last year in terms of the on-court production, but so much of becoming a professional, becoming an NBA player is about learning what you can do, what you can't do, what you can get away with, how to build a routine, set up your routine, and just how to carry yourself more than anything else. And those are things, especially now with a very young coaching staff, like, you need to learn some of those things from veterans. And we're seeing, you mentioned Fred VanVleet, like, Houston is a team very young. They've had their issues with chemistry over the last few years. Like, look at everything that they've done over the offseason just in terms of trying to expedite the growth process by bringing in vets. So one way or the other, like, guys like Scotty Barnes, some of the other young players on the team, like, they're going to have to start listening and paying close attention and learning from these guys, whether they like it or not. Otherwise, yeah, the NBA road, the NBA path could be a very, very tricky one. And in some cases, for a lot of players in the NBA or in NBA history that haven't been as open to learning those lessons, it could be a very brief one.
Josh, just because of what you just said right there, and in every conversation I've had over the last, I want to say 3 or 4 weeks with anybody covering the Raptors, it always comes back to the development of Scotty Barnes and Pascal Siakam, what happens. And I think, it's a little confusing to understand how these things can work together. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, they're two players, when you look at the age and their development window, that don't necessarily correspond, right? Like, they're at different stages of their NBA career, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you look at successful NBA teams, even the NBA champion Warriors from a couple of years ago, you have veteran players and you have younger guys at the end of the roster that are learning, growing, and the hope, I guess, for those teams is that once the baton gets passed, that those guys can then lead the way. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. You saw that even with the Raptors championship team, where Siakam and VanVleet were the kids on those teams. But at the same time, if you're looking ahead to the future and trying to put together a plan, and I think that's where the confusion lies with this Raptors team, is like, what is the plan? People want to know, okay, well, where exactly are they going? It's hard to really gauge that when you've got your top two guys, and with VanVleet gone, it's pretty clear that those are your top two guys that are kind of trending in different directions. And I think also part of the confusion is the fit on the court. I think at times they've played really well off of each other, but those stretches have been hard to sustain. I would say that both of them at this stage of their careers are below average shooters. Both of them need and want the ball in their hands, either as scorers or as playmakers. So it's tough to see the fit, and I think that's where the organization is kind of split right now too, in trying to figure out what to do, because there's no question about it. Scotty Barnes is the future. He is the one guy on this roster that they're not talking to other teams about. He is off limits. They're going to move forward with him. The question is, can he coexist with Pascal Siakam? And if the answer is no, the clock is ticking. They've got to make a decision because, as we've talked about at length, he's going into the final year of his contract. Do you extend him now? Do you let him become a free agent? Very risky considering what just happened with Fred VanVleet. And if the answer to that question is no, the answer to both of those questions is no, then you do have to seriously consider moving him now.
So, Josh, Team Canada, FIBA World Cup squad will be training this week at the OVO Center out on the lakeshore, the Raptors training facility, given over to the national men's team. We know the sordid tales. Tatti and I were just talking about the disappointments of past and how this team has not qualified for Olympics. going back to the 2000 Sydney Games, as hard as that is to believe. And obviously this is a World Cup. It's a great chance to win a World Cup championship. It's also a great chance to get your name, penned into the Paris 2024 lineup. What gives you the optimism, if you have such a thing, if you can have such a thing as an observer of Canadian basketball, what gives you the optimism that this could be a different team that gets a different result when it comes to Olympic qualification?
Dave, I have cautious optimism, as it sounds like you guys do, and as most people who have been following this program for a while do, because, I'm in the I'll believe it when I see it camp, just because we have seen so many situations with them over the years. I was in Mexico City in 2015 where they had that last-minute collapse in the one game that they needed to win after dominating the entire tournament and having a roster filled with NBA talent. And that's the one thing that gets lost a little bit because, yes, this is a really talented roster they're going to have in camp, and it sounds like they're going to have in the World Cup later this summer, but they've had talented rosters before, and it really has seemed like anything that can go wrong will go wrong in the moments where you need things to go right. They've gotten commitments from some of the country's very best players. Certainly there's a lot of excitement around this backcourt of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jamal Murray. And the commitment specifically from Jamal Murray is a huge coup for this program, not only considering the caliber of player that he is, but the fact that he's coming off of the championship win with Denver and with his injury history as well, but especially when you map out what his summer is going to look like. He just finished playing a few weeks ago. He's fresh off of the championship parade. He had a few weeks off, and now it's right back to Canada camp. And again, let's not forget what this commitment will look like here over the next month or so. The camp is about a week long, and then they go and they travel the world and play exhibition games, friendlies, which is an important thing, obviously, right? Because these guys need to build chemistry and they need to get on the same page, especially with a new coach after the Nick Nurse drama leading to the Jordi Fernandez hire. And then if things go according to plan and they do go the distance in the World Cup, that takes you until early to mid-September. So you're looking at, this is like a 5 to 6 week commitment for all of these guys. So again, credit to the program. They've had problems in the past of convincing their stars to play. They've done that now. That's a big step, but it's far from the last step, right? Now they need to go out and they need to do it, and that's what these next few weeks is going to be about. It's making sure that what's happened in the past doesn't happen again. You can't just throw a bunch of talent onto the court, especially in FIBA international play. It's very different from what these guys are used to. You can't just throw the talent out there and hope for the best. You need to have those guys get acclimated to each other and to the game, to the system. And if they can do that, then yes, that's where the optimism comes in.
Josh, what did you make of the NBA finally hitting back at NBA players requesting trades publicly with obviously sending out a memo regarding the Damian Lillard situation in which Damian Lillard's agent, Aaron Goodwin, had been reportedly lobbying other NBA teams that are not named the Miami Heat not to bother for trading for his client because he would be an unhappy player in any market not named Miami. The league sends out this memo that says, hey, guys, if this continues, if this happens again, there will be discipline, unspecified discipline, I would add. What do you make of that? Does that have any teeth at all? Or is the league actually, in your mind, maybe looking to change the way things are done when it comes to player movement?
Well, they should be incentivized to do something about it because it's not good for the game. It's not good for certain markets. It's not good for, I think, a lot of people around the league and the way that things have been going. And that's the thing is, this isn't just a recent thing with Damian Lillard. I was talking to somebody the other day and just making the point that, this is a little bit surprising the way that Lillard has kind of handled this situation, considering I'm not one that's going to preach loyalty in professional sports. There is no loyalty in professional sports. But it is interesting that a guy in Lillard who has been kind of talking up his loyalty to Portland and has been loyal to Portland for over a decade now has gone from that to not only asking for a trade, but doing it in really the worst way possible, like by making it very public that he only wants to go to one place. He's completely destroyed their leverage. And also, by the way, the timing of it, doing it a day after the start of free agency and a day after the Blazers gave Jeremy Grant a huge contract that I'm not sure they would have given him had they known that Lillard was on his way out. But the person I was speaking to made this point is that, like, okay, well, what is the, like, classy way to ask for a trade, to demand a trade these days? Like, who was the last guy to do it? And I'm thinking, okay, well, Durant kind of forced his way to Phoenix. I mean, Bradley Beal literally forced his way to Phoenix, being that he had a no-trade clause. James Harden and his many trade requests, Kyrie Irving. Like, you go back, I mean, I think if I'm going to go back far enough, like Jimmy Butler and the way that he handled things in Minnesota, really making a show of the fact that he wanted out and literally forcing his way out the door, I think that changed things in a lot of ways and kind of set this really bad precedent. I'm skeptical here that the league can do anything. Okay, they send out a memo, great. They may discipline players and agents moving forward. Okay, great, let's see it. How many memos have they sent out over the years about tampering?
Right.
Going into free agency, right? And it still happens every year. It's just one of those things that, like, it's really, really hard to police. I think, if anything, what they're saying here is if you're going to do something like this, maybe just do it quietly. And I think that's been the secret message behind tampering all along as well, too, is just like, okay, these things happen, but maybe let's not make it so public to the point where it's something that everybody's talking about. So, yeah, I would like to see them find a solution for this. I'm just not sure that that's something that's easily done at this point, given the player empowerment era and how much power star players have in the NBA today.
Josh, thanks for stopping by. Really enjoyed the conversation.
All right, guys. Talk soon.
Thank you very much. Josh Lewenberg, our TSN Raptors reporter. Plenty of stuff. We'll kick it around the next segment. Steve Phillips, top of the hour, talking about the Jays at the deadline and Yes Guy, No Guy at the bottom of the next hour.
Can't wait.
Who could? This is OverDrive on TSN 1050 and TSN 2. Oh, Yes Guy. That's Yes Guy music right there. Jim, Tatti, Dave Feschuk with you on a Monday. And setting the stage for top of the hour, Steve Phillips will take us deep on baseball as the trade deadline looms 6 o'clock tomorrow. I just want to sort of circle back, and I know we'll get into it in the open segment called Something to Chew On. Yet another variation of Yes Guy, No Guy. But this Siakam situation, like the Raptors, it's just when you look at it, you go, okay, so they're sort of going this way, but could veer this way real fast. And what happens with the remaining parts? It's at a fork in the road, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I said at the trade deadline. I said that Masai Ujiri is a guy who is in the driver's seat but can't pick a lane, right? Like, does he want to be in the fast lane? Does he want to move over to the right lane and kind of recalibrate, go a little slower, maybe kind of go to the rebuild mode? But I think the thing that is keeping him from picking that lane is the parity in the NBA. Is that there's no great teams. It's that everybody feels like.
You don't think at the top of both conferences?
Well, I mean, did you know who was going to be in the NBA Finals? Did you pick the Miami Heat to represent the East in the NBA Finals? Neither did I.
I didn't think they'd get through that.
I didn't know. I didn't know
the
they'd
first
do
round.
That.
Yeah.
I didn't think they'd do that, and I think that speaks to. Okay, maybe on right now the Denver Nuggets do look pretty damn good.
Yeah,
and I'm not going to question the validity of that title. It was an incredible performance by those guys. But I will say this, like in the East, like, do you know, like who are you picking to win it next year? I don't have a team that pops to mind.
I'd always go with Boston or Philadelphia.
Well, but Boston just did major surgery, moving out Marcus Smart and Grant Williams. I mean, bringing in Porzingis, that's not a proven team right now. I don't think there's any proven teams really. And so I think but we can argue that point. But I think what Masai Ujiri is probably thinking is, man, if the right guy would shake free, I could suddenly be one of those teams that could make a run.
Yeah, well, we'll plenty to talk about for sure. OverDrive is brought to you by FanDuel, bringing you everything from the opening line to the final score. So coming up in hour number 2, Steve Phillips will be by. Yes Guy, No Guy is all set to go. It's all queued up, as they say. Later on, Dave Naylor talking football, and later on, Brendan Dunlop talking about soccer, among other things. That's what's happening in the future, the near future, on OverDrive, listening on TSN 1050 and watching on TSN 2.